Welcome to Things You Don't Know. This podcast is the second in the football series. If you haven't checked out the first one, please do so. It would warm my heart. In the first of this series, we looked at the ancient roots of football and the college roots up to about the 1900s, the early 1900s. In this episode, we'll look at Canadian and American professional football. We'll also cover the merger of the AFC and the NFC and the formation of the NFL. I played quarterback and have been a diehard fan of the Washington Redskins, now called the Commanders, since childhood. I just wanted to make that clear. I've always been thrilled by the strategy and the art of the sport and find it irksome to have to cover the corporate greed that has overtaken the game. So, to the detriment of the pure pleasure of the game. And because of that, quite frankly, this part two has taken some time to be published. We will start with a comparison of the CFL, that's Canadian Football League, and the National Football League, or NFL.
Very striking to me that although baseball is still known as America's game, more people these days follow football in the United States than baseball. Also, the championship, the Super Bowl, is the most watched single game around the world. Let's look at some of the differences between Canadian and American football.
Well, let's start off with the field. The Canadian field of play is 110 by 65 yards compared to 100 by 53 yards, or 53 and a third yards in American football. Since 1986, the Canadian end zones are 20 yards deep. Okay, 20 yards deep, while the American end zones are 10 yards deep. Okay, in Canada, the goal posts are located at the front line of the end zone, whereas in America, they're located at the end line. Now, what this means is two things. First, a field goal has to be kicked longer in the American football game. But the reason that the goalpost was moved to the end zone, the end line of the end zone, is because injuries were occurring, but people were ramming into the damn goalposts. So they said, hey, maybe we should move it. And they did.
There's even a more basic difference. American teams use 11 players, whereas the Canadian teams have 12 players on the field per side. Both leagues have the same number of offensive players required at the line of scrimmage, so the 12th player in the Canadian game plays a backfield position on offense, and this is usually a defensive back on defense.
The sizes of individual American and Canadian footballs can vary within specified size limitations. Despite the CFL and the NFL having different specs until 2018, they overlapped sufficiently so that from at least 1985 forward, the same ball could fall within the requirements of both leagues. You may remember a Super Bowl relatively recently when there was accusations that the ball was overinflated or underinflated, etc. Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. Might be. Doubt it, though. Another difference between NFL and CFL balls is that Canadian balls have two 1-inch stripes, complete white stripes around the entire football. Three 3 inches from the largest diameter of the ball. And NFL balls have no stripes at all. Another difference is in American football, a team has 4 downs to advance the ball 10 yards, while in Canadian football, the limit is 3 downs.
The difference is also concerns the line of scrimmage. The distance between the line of scrimmage and the defense, formerly called the scrimmage zone, is 1 full yard. Because of this 1 yard distance, teams tend to gamble for a score on 3rd and 1 or 3rd and inches. If a team's offense is within 1 yard of either goal line, the line of scrimmage is moved to the 1 yard line. In American football, the set distance between the offense and defense, known in that code as the neutral zone, is 11 inches, the length of the ball. This creates the illusion that the teams are nose to nose against each other. There are also differences in punting and in the fair catch rule.
Indeed, and we're not going to go into all of that. In American football, only one offensive player is allowed to be in motion after the players are set at the line of scrimmage. And that one player cannot be moving toward the line of scrimmage when the ball is snapped. The motion player must start from behind the line of scrimmage. Players on the line, like between the two tackles, they cannot be in motion. In Canadian football, all offensive backfield players, except the quarterback, may be in motion at the snap. Players in motion may move in any direction as long as they are behind the line of scrimmage at the snap. In addition, the two players on the ends of the line of scrimmage, generally wide receivers, may also be in motion along the line. Sounds like helter-skelter to me.
Indeed. There's also a difference in terms of timing. In American football, the offensive team must run a play within 25 seconds of the referee whistling the play in, except in the NCAA and college, where teams have 40 seconds from the end of the previous play or 25 seconds following a penalty or a timeout. In Canadian football, at all levels of play, teams have only 20 seconds after the play is whistled in, regardless of the preceding situation. There's also a significant difference in timeouts. American football rules allow each team to have 3 timeouts in each half, and the NFL stops play for a 2-minute warning. However, college football has no 2-minute warning, but the clock stops on a first down until the ball is ready for play if the play ended within the field of play. In the CFL, each team has 2 timeouts per game, but it cannot use both in the last 3 minutes of the game, whereas in the lower levels, high school and college, each team has 2. Canadian football has a 3-minute rather than a 2-minute warning. Also, at all levels of Canadian football, the clock is stopped after every play during the last 3 minutes of each half. Once the referee has set the ball, the clock restarts if and only if the last play ended with a runner tackled within the field of play. Timing rules change very drastically after the minute warning in both leagues. In American football, the clock continues to run after any tackle in bounds, but stops after a complete pass or a tackle out of bounds.
You mean an incomplete pass, right?
Yes, sorry. If the clock stops, it is restarted at the snap of the ball or when the ball is ready to be played. In Canadian football, the clock stops after every play, but the starting time differs depending on the result of the previous play. After a tackle in bounds, the clock restarts when the referee whistles the ball in. After an incomplete pass or a tackle out of bounds, the clock restarts when the ball is snapped. In the NCAA, the clock stops after every first down to move and set the down markers, after which the clock restarts. You often see these men in striped shirts going around resetting everything. The penalty for allowing the play clock to run out is 5 yards with no loss of down before the minute warning in both leagues, but it dramatically diverges after that point. In American football, the penalty for what's called a delay of game remains 5 yards with the down repeated. In Canadian football, the penalty for a time count violation is the loss of down on the first or second down and 10 yards with the down repeated on third down.
In American high school and college football, as well as at all levels of Canadian football, receivers need only have 1 foot in bounds provided the player's other foot does not come down out of bounds until the catch is made, for a catch to count as a reception. NFL play requires receivers to get both feet on the ground and in bounds after making the catch for a reception to count. CFL roster sizes are 46 players rather than 53 as in the NFL, though only 45 will dress for a game. A CFL team may dress up to 44 players composed of 21 nationals, essentially Canadians, 20 internationals, almost exclusively Americans, and 3 quarterbacks. The player numbering schemes are similar in both Canadian and American football, with Canadian rules being slightly less strict. In American football, players who wear the numbers between 50 and 79 are by rule prohibited from catching or touching forward passes if their team is in possession of the ball and may not line up in a position that allows them to do so unless explicitly indicated to the referee, claiming themselves to be a tackle eligible play. In Canadian football, the ineligible numbers span only from 50 to 69. Although there are realistically more similarities and difference between the CFL and the NFL, the differences significantly impact the preferred strategies. The wider field and the almost unlimited allowed movement behind the line of scrimmage in the CFL means the CFL favors faster players, more nimble. Yet scores in the CFL are often lower than in the NFL. The rules governing the 3 minutes, 2 minutes in the NFL, the warning before the end of a half or the end of the game, tend to make it easier for teams in the CFL to stage a comeback. Now let's turn to the mess of the merger between the AFC and the NFC.
The AFL NFL merger was the merger of the two major professional football leagues in the United States at that time, the National Football League and the American Football League. It paved the way for the combined league, which retained the National Football League name and logo, to become the most popular sports league in the United States. The merger was announced on the evening of June 8, 1966. Under the agreement, the leagues maintained separate regular season schedules for the next 4 seasons from 1966 through 69, and then officially merged before the 1970 season to form one league with 2 conferences. Following its inception in 1920, the NFL had fended off several rival leagues. Before 1960, its most important rival was the All-American Football Conference, which began play in 1946. The AAFC differed from the NFL in several ways. Despite relatively strong backing at the league's inception, ultimately proved unsustainable venture. The AAFC's most serious weakness resulted from its refusal to implement an initial draft. This caused a massive lack of competitive balance and resulted in the league's strongest team, the Cleveland Browns, dominating the league and becoming perennial champions. 3 AAFC teams, the Cleveland Browns, the San Francisco 49ers, and the original version of the Baltimore Colts, were absorbed into the NFL in 1950. The league was briefly known as the National American Football League during the off-season, but reverted to the traditional name National Football League by the time the 1950 season began. The Browns went to shock NFL loyalists by dominating the older league and winning the championship in their first NFL season, thus proving themselves to be among the best professional football teams of that time. The AFL was the brainchild of former Southern Methodist star Lamar Hunt, the son of the oil tycoon H.L. Hunt, the wealthiest man in the world at that time. Lamar had been denied an NFL franchise, so he determined to create a new outlet for football. The so-called Foolish Club, the AFL, was born.
The AFL's first major success came when the Houston Oilers signed Billy Cannon, the All American and 1959 Heisman Trophy winner from LSU. Cannon signed a $100,000 contract to play for the Oilers, a lot of money for that day, despite having already signed a $50,000 contract with the NFL's Los Angeles Rams. The Oilers filed suit and claimed that Rams general manager Pete Rozelle had unduly manipulated Cannon. The court upheld the Houston contract, and with Cannon, the Oilers appeared in the AFL's first three championship games. They won two of them. The AFL did introduce a number of rule changes, including a 14-game schedule, players' names on the jerseys, and a 2-point conversion. At first, the NFL ignored the AFL and its 8 teams, assuming the AFL would consist of players who could not earn a contract in the NFL, and that fans of professional football would not waste their time watching them when they could watch the NFL. The NFL also had a big media advantage, as most of the announcers and sports commentators had direct ties to the NFL.
Nevertheless, the AFL enjoyed one critical advantage over its established rival, which was that its owners, on average, were wealthier than their NFL counterparts. As the rivalry between the two leagues intensified, both leagues entered into a massive bidding war over the top college prospects, paying out huge sums of money to unproven rookies in order to outbid each other for the best players coming out of college. The bidding wars escalated in the mid-1960s with the respective drafts of both leagues held on the same day in the late fall. Because of the intense competition, teams often drafted players that they thought they had a good chance of signing instead of selecting the best available players.
Contrary to common belief, it was not the AFL, but the NFL that initiated discussions for a merger between the two leagues, as it was fearful that Davis's take no prisoners tactics would seriously diminish the older league's profitability and or drastically reduce its talent base. Tex Ram, the general manager of the NFL's Dallas Cowboys since 1960, secretly contacted AFL owners, led by Lamar Hunt of Kansas City, and asked if they were interested in a merger. The talks were conducted without the knowledge of Davis, Al Davis, who was the AFL commissioner. On the evening of June 8, 1966, the collaborators announced a merger agreement in New York City.
This led to the creation of a championship game known as the Super Bowl, and the worldwide popularity of the Super Bowl created the concept around the world of football as the ultimate American game. Unlike other sports, there are many different ways to score, so the intensity seems to be higher, and there is constantly action taking place throughout the entire game. Also, this is just my personal opinion, a franchise that has 8 or 9 home games as opposed to the 40 basketball teams have, much less baseball's 81, provides greater excitement through novelty. The limitation of how often you can see your team play makes it more exciting. I think also football can require a different type of strategy. All games have strategy, but it seems to be more centered around the coach and the quarterback. And I think a good quarterback is like a general on a battlefield. They're leading their team, and other sports tend to be more collectivized.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you will indeed join us again. As I said the last time, we do have a rather unique surprise coming up for you And yes, it's a tease. And yes, I'm not going to tell you what it is at this point because we've got to get things settled on it first. But in the meantime, you can give us a like. Sure would appreciate that. And would sure appreciate your subscription. We're not going to do anything to you for it. It gets you, in the loop when we're doing new things. And yeah, and if you have comments, please leave them. And I guess we will close this podcast out for today. Goodbye.
Okay. So long, folks.